In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this very elegant, very stylish evening bag, but it's actually very simple as well. So I've chosen a sparkly fabric because I thought for the festive period, for New Year's Eve parties and for weddings, it just looks so glamorous. And I've quilted this as well. I've used Bosal foam for the main part of the bag, and then on the flap, I thought Bosal would be too thick, so I've actually used Craft Fleece for that one. Now I've added a chain strap. You can leave that off and make a clutch bag, or you can make one out of fabric if you prefer. It fastens with a magnetic snap, and then on the inside, a rather unexpected lining. I've chosen batik, and it's got a secure zipped pocket as well. That's a letterbox zip, and that's all fully lined as well on the inside. So you choose a fabric that you want to use to match any outfit that you have. It's a bag that you can easily make within a few hours. So you could make one to match every outfit for every party that you're going to go to. I'll leave all of the measurements and fabrics that I've used in the description box underneath the video. So go choose your fabrics, cut out your shapes, and we'll get sewing. I've already cut out all of my pattern pieces, and with the outer pieces I've already put some Bosal fusible foam on the wrong side. I'm going to quilt that. I didn't want the flap to be quite as firm, so I'm just going to use a craft fleece on the wrong side of one side of this, just to give it a little bit of firmness, but I didn't want to be as stiff as the outer bag. And the reason I wanted this to be quite firm is because it's a long thin bag, and if I'm going to put a chain handle on this, I didn't want it to pull the bag inwards when I'm wearing it. If you're just using this as a clutch bag, then it's not necessary that you're using an interfacing that's quite so firm. So I'll quilt that in just a second. I just wanted to show you how easy this fabric is to iron and to apply the interfacing. So again, just on the one side, I've used the same fabric on the lining of the flap as I have the outer, and you can see here that I've used some batik for the lining. So I'll just take my craft fleece and line that up here. You can use quite a lot of heat, and you can use steam with this one as well. Even though you've got the metallic foiling on there, it doesn't melt, it's not affected by the heat at all. So it's a really simple fabric to work with. I don't have any water in here at the moment, so I'm just pondering a little as I'm ironing this, just to make sure the heat goes through and this is secure. The craft fleece is one that we sell on the website. It's quite thin, but it's firm, and that's perfect for this kind of project. And again, it just takes steam. The knobbly side is the glue side, so I'm trying to avoid ironing over that, because I don't want to get the glue on the bottom of my iron. So once I've fixed the fabric in place, I'll cut this out, and then we'll press right up to the edge. And like so. Now I'm not going to quilt on the flap, and I was kind of thinking about rounding the corners of this off, but I think I'm going to leave it square. I think that would suit the bag. I'll show you what I mean in just a second, because when this is pieced together, that's what it's going to look like. So you could round the corners, you could make the bottom of the bag rounder, but I think I'm going to leave it just like that. I think it looks nice and crisp and square, just as it is. So let's quilt the outer pieces. So I'm using a heat erasable pen on this one, and I think I'm going to do 60-degree lines. So I'm going to create a diamond shape, and let's do 30 here. So I'm starting around about the centre. And do test your fabric before you use any kind of pens on there, just in case they mark where you don't want them to. Once I've made my first line, I'm then going to draw a 2-inch line away from that. So I'm using my ruler, the markings on my ruler, to gauge where that line's going to be. Should have maybe brought in my longer ruler for this one. It's not quite long enough for that. And another. Actually, things evolve, don't they, when you start working on a project? And I I kind of like just the diagonal lines. I don't think I'm going to make the diamonds. If I was going to make a diamond shape and cross-hatch this, then I would do the same angle of line in the opposite directions, but I think I just like the diagonals. And I'm going to do those in the opposite direction on the other side. So again, that's the 30 or the 60, same line, degree line. I'm going to have a pocket in this bag as well. I think it's quite handy to have a zip pocket if you're taking anything out with you, like your change or a mobile phone or cell phone or anything like that, just for an added extra little bit of security, and it helps you keep you organised as well. So we'll put the pocket into the lining when we've just finished this. Right, now as I'm quilting, we can go a little bit longer on my stitch, so I'm going up to 2.8 here on my stitch length. And oh, lost my foot pedal. There we go, sorry about that. And just stitch over the lines. Now, because you don't have to quilt, I think it looks nice with Bosal, with the foam, because it's so thick that the stitches really sink into it. I think it creates a really lovely effect. So you could do these lines closer together. You could free motion embroider over them. You could leave it absolutely plain, you don't need to do this at all, but I do think it adds a little bit of an elegance to the bag. It makes it look a little bit more expensive, I think, when the bag's being quilted. Let's go back down over these lines. So you can actually see the indentations where the stitch lines are. Oops, it's a bit wobbly there. I love that with Bosal foam. I love the way that it looks when it's been quilted. And then we'll do the same on the second side. And then because I've used a heat erasable pen, I can then take my iron and just very gently take away the lines. And again, do test your fabric first if you're using heat erasable pens, because sometimes they can stain a little. I haven't put the ironing mat down on here because I'm only using the point of the iron over the foam so the heat's not travelling through to the table. And the same on this bit. It can bleach, particularly on red fabrics or darker fabrics, so always best just try a little bit first. Fine on this one. Okay, so that's where we are. So let's make up the flap next. So I'm just going to take my I'm going to put the magnetic snap on first. So that's going to go on the unfleeced side. So let's fold this in half and just crease to mark the centre. And then I'll take sorry about the rustling, 2 backs, 1 front, 1 magnet. So I'll take one of the backs, and this is going to be about 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from the bottom. Place that over the top and draw a little line on each side. And then you can either use a quick unpick if you have one, or a sharp pair of scissors and make a very small cut. Better the cut to be too small than too big, because if the cut's too small you can make it bigger. If it's too big, you've got a big cut. So put the 2 prongs of the snap through the holes, pop back on, and you probably find it easier to just press those prongs open. So that's done there. And then we'll take the 2 pieces of the flap and pop those right sides together You may want to pin, or let's have actually a couple of little clips there just to hold that in place. And we'll sew around these bottom 3 sides. And I'm using the edge of my sewing machine foot as a guide, which is a little bit over 1/4 inch. Oh, stitch back to normal. So back down to 2.4 in this machine. But around about 1/4 inch is fine, as long as the seam allowance is uniform. That will work fine. So that's why we had the snap around about 1 inch from the edge of the fabric, so that we can get the machine foot around it. If you do find that where you've put the magnetic clasp is a little bit too close to the seam allowance, then you can always put the zipper foot on your sewing machine to enable you to take the foot a little bit further over to the clasp. Then I'm going to trim off the corners so I can keep those nice and pointy when I turn these through. Oops, and then we'll turn this the right side out. So again, push out those corners. If you have something like a turning tool or a knitting needle or even a skewer, it may help. I'll bring the ironing pad back up and we'll just press around the seam to give that a nice crease. And again, don't worry with this fabric. I'm not sure about any metallic or foiled fabric, but certainly with the one that I'm using here, it really doesn't mind the heat and it really doesn't mind the steam. So it's just another thing I wanted to show you, how not to be afraid of using fabrics like this. A lot of the time we buy things because we love them and then we're not sure how we're going to use them, but that's a very easy fabric to use. Now I'm going to top stitch just around the edge. So on the white and silver fabric, I'm actually using a grey thread, and I am going to move the needle over to the left hand side so that I can still manoeuvre around that magnetic snap. And I'm sewing very close to the edge. You can lengthen the stitch again here if you wish. Let's go up to a 2.6 actually. There we go, and then we'll just sew all the way around the edge. Stop with the needle down when you come to the corner and then carry on sewing. Just be careful when you do come to that magnetic snap that you are avoiding it, because we don't want the stitches to be wobbly, because you're going to see these from the right side. And I think that gives a nice, clean, crisp, smart look to our bag. Right, we can put the magnetic snap on the opposite half here now. Let's put this together first of all. So take what you're going to use as the back of your bag, and we're going to have the flap with the magnetic snap facing upwards and equal distances from each edge. So on the measurements that I've given you there, whoops, that's around about 3/4 inch from each edge. And I'm just going to sew that in place within the seam allowance, so very close to the edge. If you wanted to measure and mark that to make sure it's perfect, would be a jolly good idea. So I'm just lining up the edge of the flap to the edge of the fabric. I've got a longer stitch on here. I'm actually on a 3 because this is only a tacking stitch. Well, it's not going to come out, but that's just to hold the flap in place while we construct the rest of the bag. So now you can really see what the bag's going to look like if I put those two sides together and fold the flap over. That's how we're looking. Now I want to gauge exactly where the second half of the magnetic snap's going to be. So bear in mind we do have sides on the bag, so we don't want this to be a tight fit. So I'd fold it over and just maybe leave 1/4 inch or so so that allows it to be fastened and still have the depth to it. So let's line all of that up. I'm going to put a mark underneath here where that falls, and then if you're making a bag exactly to this size, then measure 2.5 inches from the top, and we'll just make sure that's central, so that should be 6 inches, so just slightly to one side of the mark that I made. And then we'll fit the second half of the clasp here. So again, pop the back over the hole and draw inside the 2 little lines, and then take your sharp scissors. I'm going to use a smaller pair here, or your quick unpick, and we're going to go all the way through both fabric and foam. So I'll make a little snip there to start with. Then I'm just going to push the point of my scissors through there. Again, if you have a quick unpick, those aren't quite sharp enough. A quick unpick would work very well. I don't have mine to hand. So let's fold that in half again. That's it. And then the second half of the snap, or the fatter part, which is the magnet, will go all the way through the holes that I've just made. That one needs a little bit of encouragement. It is going through the foam, so it's quite thick. I just don't want to risk making those holes too big. But that was not quite deep enough. If you do make the holes too big, it's not the end of the world. You haven't ruined your project. So what I would suggest, because you've still got a certain amount of fabric that isn't seen underneath there, so if the holes are a little bit too big, I would take a little bit of wet glue. Let's pop the back on here first so I know where that is. So we don't want that to move around. Peel that back and then just pop a little bit of wet glue inside there, or you could put some glue on the back before you put the disc on. That would work well as well. Right, so that's the back, that's the front. Let's sew these 2 pieces together. So right sides together. It's got a little thread there to snip. You could move the flap right out of the way if you wish as you're sewing, just to make sure you don't sew over it. And let's pop a few clips around here. I think it's easier to clip with Bosal than it is to pin, but it will take pins if you prefer to do that. And we're going to sew all the way around the edge. I'm not boxing this one because it will make a nice clutch bag, which tend to be very slim. So I'm keeping this one. If you wanted to make the base square, then now would be a good time to do it. By cutting out maybe 1 inch from each corner and boxing it that way. But for this one, I'm just going to keep it a very slim bag. Now let's cut across the corners. Again, to make that a little bit less bulky when we turn it the right side out. And we'll pop that through. If you do find that your foam comes away slightly when you're doing all of this turning inside out and everything, because if you're putting it through a little bit of trauma while you're doing this, it will re-iron back in place again. So when you come to your final press, if you do have any of the foam lifting, this has slightly, I don't know if you can see that bubbling slightly, but when we come to the final press, I'll do that now just to show you, that will stick back down again when you re-iron it. And again, one of the reasons I like Bosal is because it does like lots of steam, and I find that really helps to stick it to your fabric. There, so that's how that's looking. So it almost looks like it's finished, but we still need to put in the lining, and I'm going to make a couple of little loops on the side because I'm using a chain, and this has swivel clasps on the end, so I need something to hook it onto. So I could use a little piece of ribbon, but I'm going to make a little piece of tape with the spare fabric that I have here. So let's cut that to 1.5 inches wide. This can be cut down, or just cut off the selvage, cut down to size later. And then I'm going to fold the long sides to the centre. Need to iron that. So it's almost like making a little bit of bias binding. So let's fold it in half to mark the centre point. And then in half again. So I end up with a very thin strip of tape to make the loops. And let's fold that in half again. And I'm just going to hold that with a clip while it's warm to help it stay in place before I sew. You could put a little bit of glue from a glue stick on that to secure if you wish. So one thing with a metallic fabric, it doesn't really like to hold a crease too well. And again, that one to the centre. It is metallic, so it does get quite hot, so watch your fingers, it retains the heat for a while. And pop a clip on there, and another one there. And now I'll just sew down one side of those just to secure it. So those are about 4 inches or 10 centimetres long. At the moment, they will be too long, but we'll cut them down to size in just a second when we see how they look on the sides of the bag. Here we go then. So these are going to go on each side of the bag. So I want them to be quite small, but big enough to clip my clasp through. So let's open that up again. So fold in half, facing down. I think that's going to be a little bit too long. Let's cut these down to 2 inches. Then I'm going to fold in half. So only want a little loop there. And just sew this over the side seam, and we'll do that on each side. So your free arm might help as you're sewing around the sides there. But basically I just want a little loop facing downwards over the side seam. So pop the other one on here. You could pop a little bit of glue on there to secure it before you sew, if that makes it easier. And that's what we have. So when that goes inside the seam allowance after the lining goes in, I've got 2 very small loops at the side just to put my strap in like so. Let's make up the lining. So I'm going to put a letterbox zip in the lining in one side. So I've got my 2 pocket lining pieces. There we go. And there's kind of no right or wrong sides to these, but if you're using a directional fabric or something that does have a right or wrong side, place these 2 pieces right sides together. and that's around about an inch from the top of the lining. And I'll pop a couple of pins in there just to hold it in place while we draw a box for the zip to go in. So that's my zip, and I need the box to be slightly smaller, so I'm not including the metal stoppers. All of these measurements for the bag that I'm making of this size are in the description box below, but I like to explain how I came up with that. So if you wanted to make a bag that's bigger, or you want a pocket that's longer, or a zip that's longer, that's how I kind of work out how big it's all going to be, how it's going to fit. So with my box, again, I want it just inside the stoppers, so I'm going to make it 7 inches long. So have this about an inch from the top of the lining piece, and we're going to draw a box 7 inches long in the centre, and 1/2 inch wide. I'm sorry I'm not translating all of these into centimetres. The main fabrics in the description box will be in centimetres as well, but my mind thinks in inches. But I'm sure you can translate. Halfway down the middle of that box, I'm going to draw a line, and then take that line into a Y shape at each end of the box. Then using quite a small stitch, so I'm going down to a 2.2 on this machine. We'll sew all the way around the outside of the box. So I can take those pins out now, and then using a sharp pair of scissors, which don't have to be as big as mine, I make a snip in the centre and cut down the centre line that we've drawn, and then when you come up to the corners, we're going to snip into that V shape as close to the stitches as you can without going through the stitches, obviously. Up here and there. If you do go through the stitches by mistake, again, not a problem. You can just sew around the box again, just slightly outside the line that you've already sewn. And back to the ironing board, and we're going to push this through. This is why I call it a letterbox zip. I'm sure it has a professional name, but to me it looks like a letterbox or a post box. And you post the fabric through. So I find it easier to just iron the lining away from that seam first, and then push the lining through the centre, iron it again as it goes through, and then I find it easier from the lining side to then just pull the fabric through the hole, get the seam right on the edge there. Take your time with it, it will come through and it will look perfect. Just around the corners. Across that top seam. I find as well, I don't know why, but if there is any wrinkling in the corners, it tends to only happen on the lining side of the bag. So just keep pulling it through, nice and neat. And that's what we're looking like from the front. You could use a little bit of best press if you wish to make that a really crisp finish. Then we're going to take the zip and place it facing down over the gap. Oops, a glue pen may be useful, or you could hand sew a little bit of glue all around the edge of the gap. and then place the zip over the top. And you can turn this over from the right side as well and just kind of maneuver this so that the zip's running right down the centre of the hole and the ends are meeting. Right, then you can pop the zipper foot on your machine if you wish. I'm not going to with this one. I'm going to move that needle over to the left hand side again, and we'll just top stitch all the way around the zip. So if you can't manoeuvre around the zip pull, then stop with the needle down and move the zip out of the way. Let's turn this around and back down the other side. And then let's chop off the ends of the zip. So I'm just inside the metal stopper there. We don't want to risk sewing over that. And snip off the end bit here as well. Then we'll take the second part of the lining, the pocket lining, sorry, and place that over the first. And we'll pin this, but I'm only pinning through the lining pieces, not all the way through the main fabric. So just on the pocket pieces. Just make them. And the last one there. And then we're going to sew around the edge just of the pocket. So we'll move the main fabric out of the way. And so I'm going to lining up the edges of the pocket fabric. When I come to the corner here, I'm just making sure that the outer fabric is out of the way still, so push that out of the way, just make sure it's only pocket fabric you're sewing through. Another one here. Never sew over your pins. And back down to where we started. And then we'll take the pins out. And that's the side of the lining finished. So when I open this up, I see that nice little lining fabric on the inside there. Now these two are going to be sewn right sides together. But this time I need to leave a turning gap. So we'll sew this together just like we did with the outer fabric. So let's have a couple of pins in here. And because it's a long slim bag, I think the best place for the turning gap is actually going to be in the base here. Sometimes I like to leave the gap in the side so that when you look inside the bag you can't see the closure. But this time I'm going to leave it in the base because it's going to make it easier to turn through. So again, just back stitch there a little bit and sew all the way around. So let's pop the pins out. Go back to my outer bag, let's undo this and fold the flap over. So with the lining inside out and the outer bag the right side out, we're going to push one inside of the other, and I want the zip to be at the back, so that's going to be on the side where the flap is. So just pop this inside. The outer bag is a little bit chunkier than the lining because we've got the Bosal in there, so it may seem as though it won't fit properly, but it will. It doesn't matter if it scrunches up a little bit. Make sure that the side seams match and those tabs are facing downwards. So I'm going to put a couple of clips just in those seams there to hold that in place. Make sure your lining, your flap is facing downwards. So again, it will feel tight, but it will work. One more in here. And then we're going to sew all the way around the top. So this time I will take the accessory compartment off my sewing machine. Pop that underneath. And sew. It may feel as though it wants to fight back a little bit because everything's getting a little bit chunky now. But take your time, persevere. Ignore what's going on here. We're just concentrating on making sure that the edge of the lining and the edge of the outer bag are lined up. That was a little bit of bashing on the needle as I sewed over the tabs on the side because there's quite a thickness of fabric to sew through there. You may find it easier to use a denim needle on your sewing machine. They're stronger needles that are designed for thicker fabrics, not just for denim. So with lots of layers like this, then that may help. Feeding this through. Coming up to another side seam, so another bash with the needle. Maybe time to change that after this one. There we go. And back to the beginning. Pop my clips back. And then we'll turn everything through that turning gap that I left at the bottom of the bag. I may not have left that big enough, but it will soon become bigger. If that's the case, you may hear the stitches rip a little bit. So I'm just trying to be gentle. Obviously, the smaller the gap that you leave, the less sewing you need to do to close it, so the more invisible it will be. Let's just keep feeding this through. Just got a thread caught there. There we are. Okay, so that's looking nice. I don't know where they come from. There were no threads sticking out when I sewed this together, but here they are. Right. So I'll just check my seams, looking good all the way around. Happy with that. And then we'll fold the edges of that opening together. And I'm just going to machine stitch across there. If you wanted to make this invisible, maybe you're making this to sell, or you just want the very best possible finish, then I would hand sew that closed with a ladder stitch. But for my bag, and actually a lot of bags that you would buy do have machine sewing. Have a look inside the bag that you bought and you might find that those are machine sewn. So let's snip away more excess threads, and then the lining goes inside the bag. Now, because I've used Bosal, it is quite chunky, and I need to fold the top of that over and then top stitch all around it. So I like to start in an area that you don't see too much of, so maybe just before the loop at the back. There's a lot of fabric in there now, so do be careful when you sew over it. I'm lengthening the stitch to, let's go to a 2.8 for this one, and then we'll loop this over with a flap up this time, flap upwards, pull the flap away from the bag so the seam's nice and flat, and just start the stitches going, just to get the needle in the down position. Right, and then we'll feed this under the needle. Take your time when you come to those tabs at the side because the fabric is very thick, and if you don't think your machine is going to cope with it, turn the hand wheel towards you and just take that over the strap by hand. Make sure that strap is pointing upwards in the same way that the flap is at the back. Okay, so let's again get that seam right on the edge. And I'm sewing about an 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the seam. So it's quite quite easy on the front bit. I'm just rolling the foam over to get the seam right on the top there. And again, coming up to the tab on the side, make sure it's pointing outwards. Always stop with your needle down. Pull that out. And then slowly as you sew across it. When we come to the flap at the back, make sure the flap's pulled away from the seam. Everything's get nice and flat under there. And again, just sew a few stitches at a time. Until we get back to the beginning. So I'm just making sure the lining's pulled away, the flap's pulled away. And basically the seam is sitting as flat as I can make it. Back to the beginning. So again, there's bound to be threads. And let's give it another press. There's another one. Things always look so much nicer when they've been pressed, don't they? And again, as I said before, this is a deliberately slim bag. It's a nice little evening bag. But it is quite roomy inside there, so you do have plenty of room for, I don't know what you're going to take out with you. It could be, so certainly mobile phones, a little bit of makeup, a purse even. You could make a smaller version and make it into a purse. So you've got something that's matching. And that folds over and fastens like so. I'm going to press that down as well. On the big iron with a bit of steam will help there, just to keep that nice and flat. And then the final thing to do is to just add my chain to those loops at the side. And cut off more stray threads. Where do they come from? And there's that one. So I'll just put the accessory compartment back on my sewing machine while I think about it. And that is my bag finished. So I think it gives a quite an expensive look when you're using fabrics like this. I think the quilting adds something to it as well. And then easy to open up with a magnetic snap. Plenty of room on the inside. I love a little bit of an unexpected lining. You could use plain if you prefer. And there's your security pocket, which again is all fully lined on the inside. So I think it's quite a quick make. This video has been pretty much real time. There's only a few bits where I've speeded up. So it doesn't actually take too long to make, and you can make it in any fabric that you like. So if you've got a few occasions, if you've got a few different outfits, you can actually make something to go with any outfit that you're wearing. And I think it's a useful size of bag as well. Of course, you don't have to use the chain. I think that adds to the evening look, because I've designed this for for the glittery fabric. So it's something special for Christmas time and New Year's Eve and parties and weddings and things like that. But you could use a fabric strap if you wish, or again leave the strap off, leave the tabs off, and then you've got a really nice size clutch bag as well. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I look forward to seeing your takes on it as well, hearing about how you change things, what you do with it. Maybe a little bit of embroidery or a fabric rose on the front would look lovely as well. So you've got the basics there. You go off and you make as many bags as you like, embellish as much as you like, and enjoy making every one of them. I'll see you again soon.